Hello. Good afternoon, everybody. I think I will kick things off because I know we've got an awful lot to fit into the next hour. So I'm just going to get started and let people join us as they can. Hello, welcome to this Business Culture Connected webinar. My name is Katie Jacobs. I'm a writer and I'm a journalist, and I specialise in HR and the world of work, people and culture. And I'm really happy to be here today hosting this session, facilitating the next hour or so with a panel of really brilliant speakers. And we're going to be talking about a topic that I know will mean a lot to everybody watching: how to position culture, something instinctively we all know matters a lot, as a critical strategic asset, and how we can go about proving the link between culture and performance. We're also going to be telling you about a brand new, hot off the press, research-led framework, the Business Culture Certification Program, developed with Hult International Business School. This framework combines robust employee and senior leader surveys with structured evidence reviews to give a clear picture of culture and how it drives performance. And we will dive into that in a little bit more detail later on. But before we get going properly, I want to introduce our brilliant panel of experts who are going to be talking about the new certification, sharing their insights on culture as a strategic asset in general and their real-world experiences. So let me very quickly run through who we've got. First up, I know that many of you will know her already, but we're joined by Kath Longfield. Kath is co-founder of the Business Culture Awards and Business Culture Connected. We have Dr. Karina Schofield and Dr. Aidan Kearney, both from Hult International Business School at Ashridge. Karina is Research Director of the Leadership Impact Lab, and Aidan is a Professor in HRM and Organisational Behaviour, so both bridging that gap between academia and practice in people and culture, and of course the research partners for the new certification. We have Nikki Paris. Nikki is Director and Client Partner at award-winning HR consultancy ETS. Nikki has more than 20 years' experience consulting with organisations of all shapes, sizes and sectors, helping them provide the best experience for their people. And ETS has deep expertise in employee experience and is the survey partner for the Business Culture Certification Programme. And last but not least, we are joined by two leaders from social care provider Be Caring, CEO Sharon Lowry and her colleague Laura Mwaba, Director of Business Development and Innovation. And Sharon and Laura are going to take us through their powerful case study later on, and they are the first organisation to achieve Business Culture certification. So congratulations to them. So those are our experts, quite a lot of them, so we will keep things tight. Thanks all for being here. Before we kick off going into the topic, I just want to run through some very quick housekeeping about the session. We will be taking your questions, and please do get them in throughout. Do not leave them to the last 5 minutes because that is very annoying and we don't get to address them. I'll be picking them up later in the panel discussion. Could I ask you to use the Q&A function if you want to submit a question, but use the chat function if you want to chat to each other, make any comments, introduce yourselves, drop in your LinkedIn profiles, do a little bit of networking. Please do go ahead and use the chat function for that. Any slides and further information about the certification is going to be made available to you afterwards via email. The session is also being recorded. You'll be able to access it within the next 48 hours. All right, so let's get into it. I'm going to start by making a very sweeping statement, but I think given you've chosen to tune into this session, it is a fair assertion. You think culture matters. You see it as one of the most valuable strategic assets an organisation has, and you're sure it drives performance. And that's all great. But how do you prove it? We're all working through really challenging times. CEOs and boards are focused on driving performance. Supporting that performance and asking for the investment to do so can't come through fluffy assertions or from anecdotes. People teams need evidence. We know culture matters, but many organisations still struggle to prove it consistently in language and via metrics that other leaders trust and understand. So today we're going to explore how to overcome that challenge. We're going to show how leading organisations are putting rigour behind culture, turning it from a belief into measurable business value. And, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to tell you a little bit more about the new Business Culture Certification Programme, a research-led framework that combines employee and senior leader surveys with structured evidence reviews to give you a clear picture of your culture, how it drives performance, and how you can best showcase it to all your stakeholders. So we're going to be bringing evidence into the chat, and you will hopefully be leaving this session with a stronger understanding and confidence in proving, not just having a gut feeling, that culture really does drive outcomes. But before we get into that, I want to do a short poll and get you involved. We want to know, To what extent can you prove that your culture impacts business performance? So that should have come up on the screen. I'm going to give you a minute to answer. Because we're tight on time, I will just keep going. I'll come back to the responses in a minute. The running order. First up, we're going to hear from Kath about turning culture into a strategic asset and a quick overview of the new business culture certification. Then on to Karina and Aidan for some insight into the scientific rigour of measuring culture. And Nikki is then going to share some thoughts on understanding employee experience of culture. And last but not least, Sharon and Laura are going to share their case study, how you bring this all to life in practice. And then we're going to go into discussion. And we really, really want your questions. Hopefully that gave people enough time to answer the poll. Robin, can we get the responses up? And so you can see the majority of people partially able to prove that culture impacts business performance, anecdotal or qualitative insight, but not an insignificant amount saying that they do have some data, not consistency compelling, and a smaller proportion saying they fully have that evidence and leadership trusted data. I'm going to take a step back. I'm going to hand over to Kath to reflect on those responses a little bit more and kick us off talking about culture as a strategic asset and a little bit more about the certification. Kath, over to you.
Thank you, Katie. So partially 36% of people are saying, and mostly 28% of people are saying. Mostly partially, it doesn't really surprise me at all. Most organisations have got some data, engagement scores, attrition, maybe a pulse survey, but it's really consistent and joined up and expressed in a way that senior leaders really trust. This gap between proof and belief is why we've really built this framework. So really interesting. So, culture is driving performance because it's obviously shaping how work gets done when nobody's watching. So while strategy is setting the direction, culture is determining the speed, the quality of the work, the risk taking, and the follow through from people. So just going on to the kind of main things that I wanted to say in this part. Culture becomes a strategic asset when it's not just good, it's healthy and it's aligned. It's aligned to strategy, it's aligned to purpose and values, it's future ready, and it's enabling subcultures, not just imposing a monoculture or a uniform culture. And it's also evidenced, as Katie said, in a way that leaders trust. When people say we've got a good culture, that's great. But what they often mean is that people are nice to each other, they're kind, engagement isn't terrible, attrition is manageable. But a strategic culture is different. It's healthy, it's aligned. So if a strategic culture is an aligned culture, what exactly do we mean by that? Well, we firstly mean culture strategy alignment. This is really important. So do the behaviours that people experience day to day actually enable the delivery of the business strategy, or do they impede it? We also mean purpose and values alignment. So is the consistency between what's stated or written about purpose and values, or is there a disconnect there between what employees are actually experiencing? And future readiness. Is your culture building capability for tomorrow? Is there agility, adaptability, innovation, foresight? So it's not just about how we do things today, it's about future workplace readiness. And crucially, subcultures, even strong organisations have got pockets where certain attributes of the culture are dialed up or dialed down. And that's really important, a really important enabler of performance, because there's certain offices or functions that you may want to do things slightly differently to the rest of the organisation. Can I have the next slide, please, Robin? So leaders need proof and the impact of culture on performance. So the question becomes, how do we measure culture in a way that leaders trust? The approach we've devised combines two things. So it's robust surveys, and that's an employee view and a senior leader view. And that's really different, obviously, to know where there's alignment and where that diverges. There's also a structured evidence review. So we're not just relying on sentiment alone, we're triangulating that with what people experience and in terms of the organisational evidence. Sorry, we're triangulating what people experience by the evidence. And we bring that together to give one clear picture of how the culture really works, including the areas that matter, like is your culture enabling or impeding your strategy? And the benefit of this is twofold. Firstly, you're getting leadership trusted insight that you can act on. So it's not about what's your score, but what does your overall score and what do the sub scores mean for delivery? Are they pointing you in a particular direction? Second, clearly, having founded the Business Culture Wars 10 years ago, we are a recognition platform for business culture, and organisations can now be recognised as business culture certified. And that brings together the elements. As I said, it's not just about good culture, it's about bringing together the elements of people, purpose, and strategy and aligning those. And this is alongside recognition through the awards, which importantly recognise programmes and initiatives where they have an impact on culture and also on performance. And that's really important to individual teams within the organisation, because you may have teams working on a new wellbeing programme that's having an impact on your culture and you want to gain recognition for that. So absolutely, we will still do that. And finally, why have we built this with Hult International Business School as our research partner, as well as enlisting senior people and culture practitioners who work at the coalface? It was also really important to me that we bring academic rigour, leadership science, and validated methods to this. Not only does it make what we're doing robust, but it also makes it sustainable for the future. And I think that's what will encourage organisations to get involved. So before I hand back to Katie, I just want to reiterate, culture isn't soft, it's measurable. And when you can evidence that, it's truly a strategic asset that leaders can invest in with confidence.
Thank you, Kath. Let's hear now from Karina and Aidan about a bit more of that leadership science, academic rigour, and validated methodology. Karina, over to you.
Thanks, Katie. Robin, there should be a slide there. I'm just going to start by providing a very brief background to the role of Hult International Business School in the development of the measure. Hult started working with BCA at the beginning of last year, and this slide summarises the key stages of development we've gone through since to get us to this point. And you can see on the slide, I won't go into detail, but we started with the academic theory, the literature, looking at what there was in detail, identifying cultural models we could use to form the measure. This work was led by Aidan, who you'll hear from in a minute. And then over these various stages, we created a survey instrument. The key parts of the process I want to highlight is that as well as the academic literature, we also brought in the practitioner voice. So we had an advisory board. These were senior HR professionals. They informed the development of the survey. They piloted the survey. We then ran another round of pilot studies with HR professionals. Again, there was over 500 people responded. And then we have a statistical team here at Hult who analysed all of that data, and they looked to see whether the survey measure was fit for purpose to use with organisations. So was it measuring what we wanted it to measure? And then following these findings from the statistical analysis, we refined the measure slightly, and then we had this final survey measure for use. I'll hand over to Aidan, who will tell you a bit more about the background behind the measure as well.
Thank you very much for that, Karina. And Robin, we should have a slide. My first slide, please. So in trying to explain our approach here at Hult, to understanding culture and its relationship or performance, our approach really lies in systems thinking. And the essence of systems thinking has often been visualized and is often visualized in something like this. So next slide, Robin. Thank you, Bernd. And I think we probably are pretty familiar with this, the people in this audience. This is Hall's iceberg model. And we can see in this iceberg model, as is applied to culture, we can see that a distinction is often made between what we see above the waterline and what lies below the waterline. So if we look at the behaviors, the decisions, the actions that are very obvious to organizational members and stakeholders, we see them every day. We know what our structures are, what our organizational charts look like. We know what our reward systems are like, what our equality and diversity systems are like, and so forth. But actually, the main proposition is that what we see above the waterline is not disconnected between what lies below the waterline. And of course, what lies below the waterline are those less visible dimensions. And they, as the academics refer to as consciousness. So the mindsets that dominate on a whole host of issues in the organization, and how work is done, how performance is measured, and what is good and what is bad, what is acceptable, what is not acceptable. So attitudes, norms, values, and logic. So actually, these two areas above and below the waterline are actually quite connected. So that's my yellow arrow there is meant to illustrate this kind of mutual interdependence and ecosystem that is culture, visible and less visible. And so really, as leaders and as culture change agents, we read it's not enough. Yes, it's important to tackle bad behaviors, for example, but if we only tackle bad behaviors without tackling some of the issues that actually sustain and drive those behaviors, for example, then that's not going to affect real change, because the issues will keep recurring because we haven't fixed the system, the systemic approach. And so if we move to the next slide then, Robin, the next important element of our approach to measuring culture lies in the role of leaders. And this is a different visual, but the same. It's a variation of a theme, root and branch. And we can see here that what lies below the ground, the roots that sustain and feed good behaviors, good actions, good decisions, good engagement, and the reverse. But leaders have this huge role in shaping above and below, a huge role in that. And that takes us to the next element of our kind of conceptual mapping for this, Robin. The next slide is the issue of alignment. So that given that we leaders have this huge role in shaping culture for good or ill, that's hugely important because the outer circle of our environment is very turbulent. Lots of economic and political and social shocks and crises of all types, which we as organizations have to respond to. And we see culture as that kind of container that helps us to meet these challenges that we have day in, day out. And also the issue there, we all have strategies in our organizations to move us to better places and a whole host of business outcomes. And we see that culture actually shapes strategy and can drive strategy in a way that leads us to think in the next slide, rather the final slide, which is around culture as an organizational capability. Of course, in this audience, I'm sure most of us are very well aware of David Ulrich, or Dave Ulrich, a hugely esteemed writer on organizational culture and dynamics and such like. And his writings and his work has focused on organizational capabilities, the things that differentiate organizations from one another, whether that be the strength of your leadership bench, the talents that you have, or your agility as an organization. We say that culture can actually be that organizational capability, can be added to Ulrich's list as something that differentiates you from from our competitors and from other people in our environment. And so I believe we have a poll, if I'm correct.
Yep, there should be a poll coming up on the screen, which we would like you to respond to. So think about your organization Do you think your organisation's culture helps or hinders people to deliver to the best of their abilities on the whole? So please select one answer. We'll give you 30 seconds, a minute to respond. So is your culture actively enabling people to perform at their best? Is it supporting performance, but there might be some barriers? Or at the other end, is your organisation's culture actually making it very difficult for people to perform at their best? It's really important if you can be as honest as possible when you're answering, because these sort of things, if you think about where you are at the moment, not where you'd like to be, by answering this very honestly, we can see where people actually are, not where they think they are. So it's a really good starting point to think about your organisation's culture. Can we see the results, Robin? Okay, great. So majority are is skewed to the positive side of things, which is great. We see many of you feel your culture is enabling people to perform at their best. The most percentage actually there's mostly helps. So with a few barriers. So it depends what these barriers are. I mean, they can be the things that actually hold people back. They can be things we're not sure about. So trying to find out what those barriers are and actively working on them can be a great step forward. Nobody at this strongly hinders, which is great.
I think that is an interesting result and shows a lot, or signposts to a lot of really positive work that has been done in the organizations of our participants today. I mean, the organizational researcher and that in me is very interested in that 32%. The 32% strongly helps. So I immediately, my analytical brain goes into, well, what is happening there? I'd love to know what's happening in those organizations. Bank that knowledge, save that knowledge, and showcase it, because really there's a lot that we can learn from those 32% that say their culture strongly helps performance. And we see here in terms of the help and hinder debate, the enable debate or not. I mean, in our research here, a lot of organizations and leaders, they keep talking about what they need, what they really want from their people is innovation, creativity, energy, vigor. They want people to be absorbed in their work. They want dedication because that leads to positive outcomes, to positive business outcomes. But then if the freedom underneath the layer, the autonomy, the power dynamics are not enabling that, are not encouraging that engagement, then there's a direct link to poor performance there. They would be my observations on that poll.
I hand back to Katie.
Thank you both. I'm sure we can dig into some more of that during the chat. So I'm going to hand over to Nikki now, the survey partner on the certification, to talk to us a bit about that. Nikki.
Thank you, Katie. Thanks so much. And as you said at the beginning, thinking about ETS's role, where we bridged the academia and lots of what we heard there from Karina and Aidan, really interesting, but into the practice. And I guess that's where our focus lies day to day. So at ETS, we talk about the employee experience. And the reason we focus on that is our view is that that's where culture lives. Culture is the day-to-day experience that your people are having. So it's not this sort of big nebulous entity that some may believe it to be. Our view is that it's observable, it's measurable, and as many of us have already attested to it, it does fundamentally link to strategically what you're trying to achieve. It's also not one thing, it's a whole operating system, I think, as you saw on the iceberg visual that Aidan shared. And we make a similar reference. So Robin, thank you. If you don't mind bringing up my first slide. There we go. Thank you. So ETS, we refer to a plumb line. This is something that some of you may not be familiar with. It is ultimately a mechanism for creating a pure and straight line. And we use it as an analogy for what businesses need to achieve in terms of alignment. We've had that word a few times already today. Alignment on three critical layers. So we look at three layers here. The top one is direction. Thank you, Robin, if you don't mind clicking on. Thank you. So this is the big picture. This is the who are we? What do we stand for? Where are we trying to get to? And how do our colleagues, each individually, day to day, come to work and play their own part in delivering on that broader piece? So the clearer they are and the more connected they are to that purpose and that direction, the more success we see in terms of the organisations that we're partnering with. The middle layer, we've used the term ethos, but really what we're talking about here is the values and behaviours. So this is how our senior leaders show up in front of colleagues when people are watching, and also equally important when no one's watching. The sorts of environments that managers create day to day. So are they enabling work? Are they supporting the team? Are people feeling included and that they're safe and they have a voice and they can innovate, and all those good things that we've covered? And then our third and final layer we refer to as enablers. And really what we're looking at here is, are we setting our colleagues up as best we can to deliver what we need from them to deliver on that strategy? And here it's a whole host of things. It's systems, it's processes, it's tools, it's learning and development. But essentially, being really clear on what we're trying to achieve strategically and what we need culturally from our people, a big aspect is focusing in on some of those enabler items as well. So what we're looking at here when we deliver work to the organisations that we're supporting is sorry, Robin, thank you for your good link here. Where might there be a break in the employee experience? Because what's important for us to understand is, where does the break apply? And therefore that guides us in terms of our priorities for where we might follow up. Because there's always a wealth of data that you capture from surveys, but we always advocate shortlisting and highly prioritizing the things that are likely to have the biggest impact on the experience that colleagues are having. So really, I guess all this to say that surveys are critical because what they give us and what they give business leaders, and to Katie's earlier point, sometimes when you're pitching for investment in these sorts of things, they give us some really clear evidence. They give us baseline, they give us evidence. They're not anecdotes, they're not assumptions. They are measurable, tangible things that we need to focus in on. And one of the big recommendations we always make to a business is, once we've prioritized and articulated what the solution might be, think about what you're trying to achieve in terms of moving that dial. So if this is our starting point, where are we trying to get to and how quickly? And holding ourselves to account to that, really coming back to those items and remeasuring. And that's where surveys really come into play. Like Aidan, I love the data. So the more data we have, the more tracking we can do over time, ensures that we're putting all our efforts in the right direction. And on the next slide, just very high level, I know we're all a bit short for time and we want to make sure we leave time for the case study. On the next slide, thank you, Robin, I've just gathered here a collection of data points from programs that we've delivered over the last sort of 6 to 18 months. It was really interesting to see the poll at the beginning, the extent to which people feel they have proof and evidence that there is that connection, and focusing on the culture is ultimately the same as focusing on the strategy. So mindful of time, I'm just going to bring one of these to life, and maybe other examples will come up in the Q&A. So it's the piece of data actually top right hand of the screen, and this is actually also a care provider, so very similar sector to the Be Caring colleagues on the call here. So this was an organisation where there was a bit of a cultural backstory, but basically there was the task at hand was to rebuild trust, psychological safety and inclusion. And so culturally, of all the things that they could focus on, that was the thing that we'd identified in the first survey that was their biggest priority area. We've been working for many years, that the case study and the data here is sort of between survey 1 and survey 2, where we had really helped them focus in specifically on this particular area of opportunity for their culture. And the 73% reduction in temporary staff was multiple benefits. Obviously, there's millions and millions of pounds in savings, which this business was then able to reinvest both in the colleague experience, but most importantly, I guess, that the experience of those that they're caring for. So thinking about that churn that they were seeing before, high levels of turnover, high levels of agency staff, it was costing a lot, but also culturally, it was really impacting on the experience of colleagues and residents day to day. In short, they achieved it by focusing on many different areas, but really dialing up on the employee value proposition. So making themselves a much more appealing employer in their sector and in their local area to be able to fill the many vacancies that they'd had for many years. Reducing turnover, so that employee stability, retaining colleagues. The CEO said when I first met him, I've got pretty much a revolving door of my frontline staff. I'm replacing the whole cohort every 2 years. It's not sustainable. So looking at that and drastically reducing, I think they halved the employee sickness rates as well. So all of those are ingredients into that. But ultimately what this business was able to achieve is 85% of their homes now in the good or outstanding CQC rating brackets, and a 9.6 out of 10 on the carehome.co.uk sort of ratings. So the advocacy measures of the care that they're able to provide. So it was a long and much more involved journey than time permits me to share, but that's just one of the examples I just wanted to bring to life. So I'll hand back to Katie. I know we've got a case study and much more opportunity, hopefully, for further discussion and questions.
Thank you, Nikki. So I'm going to hand over now to Sharon and Laura, who are going to, we've heard a lot of theory. Let's bring this to life in a real world organisation. So Sharon, Laura, over to you.
Thank you, Katie. A huge thank you to everybody joining the webinar today, and thanks for the invite to speak. Could I have the slides up, please? So I'm Sharon Lowry. I'm the Chief Exec of Bee Caring. Just a bit about us for people who don't know who we are. We are an employee-owned social enterprise delivering home care and learning disability service across the north of England. We work across 7 local authorities. Very much values-led organisation. And there's an 8-year story as to how we've got to where we've got to now. Next slide, please, Robin. So I joined back in 2018, and the organisation was at rock bottom from a finance, performance, culture and quality basis. So we had no option. We had to change. So I really had to get to grips with what was happening here. And fundamentally, the system is flawed, and this is a system that every social care provider works in. So I was really struck by the term fixing the system. So as much as we're trying to create this amazing culture and value our workforce, we're trying to battle against the system. So there's definitely something going on here. But to get to grips with it, why we had to change was carers are not valued. They're often not paid for travel time. They can be out working 10, paid for 7. That leads to a high turnover, poor retention. The people we support are not receiving that continuity of care because they've got different people going through their door. So it's really challenging. And we have this amazing workforce that are undervalued, underutilised, highly skilled, cost effective, and the opportunity here to turn this, to create the prevention, to really focus on the prevention agenda and supporting the NHS, we are missing a trick. Next slide, please. Just a few key aspects on the journey. 2018, we had a negative balance sheet. We owed £1 million to all and sundry. We were struggling to pay the wages and HMRC, etc. Next slide, please. The first thing we did, getting on top of the finances was one thing, but we actually focused on how we were going to work with one another. What values were we going to live to? So we co-designed these with our colleagues. We were called CASA. We went from CASA to Be Caring. It does what it says on the tin. So the branding and establishing the right leadership were 2 of the fundamental things that we did in 2018 that really took us on that journey and sort of set the baseline. We then moved to pay carers fairly. So we paid them for the full time they're out at work. Most of you are probably thinking, isn't this just common sense? But within the social care sector, this is a big challenge. It absolutely is the fundamental reason why there is such a high turnover. This is very, very quick, but get to 2020 and we actually managed to pay our first colleague bonus. So we managed to have a positive balance sheet and distribute some of the money that we'd made. Next slide, please. I think So we were trying to create this amazing culture internally and for carers to feel valued and feel part of something and feel empowered to make a difference, knowing that we really did value them. But we had this battle externally with our commissioners. So it's been a bit of an education, I think, to try to see that what they think they're buying and what's actually achievable with the money on the table were very misaligned. So some of the principles we took were we have to value our workforce. We've got to drive quality. We've got to deliver value for money, and we've got to be financially sustainable. That's not just us as an organisation, but that is the self-funder, the local authorities, etc. Some of the evidence: we have increased productivity, we've increased contact time, we've created these amazing stories. We don't have every day I log on and think, oh, how many people have gone off sick? What is the work that's unallocated? I don't even log on some days to the system because we're not concerned. We've got an amazing workforce who deliver amazing care out in the community, and obviously we got that elusive outstanding in one of our services as well. Next slide, please. And I think I'm going to hand over to Laura. So thank you so much, everybody.
Thanks, Sharon. I do apologise. I think the next few of my slides are full of data, but I'm not going to focus on the data. So when we got the opportunity to do this certification, we quietly felt confident because we do track and measure internally colleague engagement through regular surveys twice a year, and we've seen those metrics improve. We get high participation rates, but one of our strapline is about transforming the sector. And while we can say, oh yeah, we've got these brilliant results internally, they can be completed anonymously. That we always say to colleagues they can do those anonymously. We wanted that external validation because as an employee-owned organisation that's really values-led, trying to value the workforce, we want to change the sector, and so we need that external validation, or we want that external validation that says yes, culture is important, values are important, and valuing the workforce is important. And actually, if you commission better and get better providers, values-driven providers in the market, non-extractive models, operating models, then you can do more with the money that's there. Next slide, please. So we got the results back and the report, very, very detailed report, really, really insightful. I think what was nice is there was no huge surprises. We expect there to be, strengths and areas for improvement, gaps that we need to address, but we know that we're on a continuous improvement journey as an organisation anyway. But we were really pleasantly surprised by the result. 84% overall. Really strong alignment with our purpose and values. We had more than 250 frontline colleagues complete the survey, and 17 people from our senior leadership team who completed the assessment. But the most common words that we used were caring, kind, friendly, and family. So who we are, Be Caring as an organisation, is the values and it is the culture that people experience on a day-to-day basis. And some of that is lived through our Above and Beyond programme. It's been one of the things that we implemented quite early, a way that people could utilise the time while in the care calls to really make a difference to people's lives. One example is we had one of our care workers in Newcastle who went out and bought a chessboard to play chess with someone that we support who hasn't done that for years and really wanted to do that. We've had someone support someone to access community groups. And these are just a few examples that we've managed to achieve within the commission time, just by empowering colleagues, giving people that empowerment, accountability, permission to do more for the people that we support. And the other thing to note is that, voice, because we're employee owned, we do have employee voice in our constitution. It's part of our structure. We have the voice chair, so that's our employee ownership membership group, and they sit on our board. So employee ownership is lived as who we are. The motivation score was extremely high. People really understand why they come to work, the difference and the impact that their work has. Next slide, please. So what were some of the challenges that came out? So there was a slight gap on our culture outperforming our operational infrastructure. But what this means is that there's a really, really strong culture, but some of the day-to-day operational barriers exist and prevent some of that happening. And that is largely around, so some of the common feedback on the survey was around rotas, gaps, time travel, not having enough time in the care calls. But that is very much about the sector. It's about how care is commissioned. And because we are paid people on a block basis, it means that people get to utilise that time as much as possible. And so there is that, and there's a slight discrepancy in terms of workload concerns between the senior leaders and the frontline staff. But again, that is very much a feature of care. It's how it's commissioned, and we are investing in our own IT system. So next slide, please. So what we're doing is we are building our own platform, CareView 360, which will make rotas more realistic. We'll be able to evidence the travel time properly. There is nothing on the market. There's no IT system on the market in care that helps us address that gap to really, truly value the workforce. And that will help us influence commissioning as well, because we'll have the data, we'll have the evidence like no other care provider has, to be able to say, this is what this is what you can get with the money that you have. This is what's realistic. This is what's achievable. But in terms of addressing the pay, it's a challenge. It's a sector-wide challenge. There's been real-term funding cuts across the years. The government's not investing in care. There's big challenges ahead. All we can do is go with the evidence to say, this is the money. If this is the money you've got, then this is what we can do with it. But we will not accept a contract, tender for work that doesn't allow us to value the workforce. So our growth and our strategy around growth is very much tied to that values, being employee owned. We won't go for a contract that doesn't enable us to value our workforce. Thank you.
Ian, thank you so much, Sharon and Laura. So we've got about 15 minutes or so. I'd love to ask you all some questions. We've got a really nice discussion going on in the chat, some really rich commentary in there. So let me just kind of pull some of those themes together, a bit of a discussion going on about sustainably keeping culture on the agenda when priorities naturally shift, when leaders' attention might go to other places. I think somebody has really nicely described it as, if it's seen as a cultural transformation program, buying new curtains when the house is on fire. But obviously it's not about that. It's about the culture changes, the fire extinguisher you need in the first place. Nikki, any thoughts about kind of how we embed this sustainably? And it's a long-term journey. I think someone else made a comment that this, it's doomed to failure if you see it as a kind of short-term implementation project. So how do we make this sustainable and bring leaders along with us?
Yeah, I fully agree. None of these are overnight solutions, and lots of the programs of work that we've all touched on are many months and years in the making. I think, in my experience, it's just making sure that really early on in these programs, you're engaging as many stakeholders as you can, particularly at that senior level, for them to really understand the impact of getting this right or getting it wrong. And I think the place at the table for that conversation is much easier now than it might have been 4 or 5 years ago. But I think it's sustaining that conversation and always bringing it back to what happens if we don't address this, or what happens if we do address this, and trying as best we can to articulate that. And for some, it is in monetary terms. In others, it might not be. But how can we talk in the language that those that need to continue investing and where we need to hold people's attention, how can we talk in a language that's meaningful for them? Because people are ultimately your strategy. Strategy is the plan of where you're trying to get to, but your culture and your people will be the deciding factors to whether it gets delivered or not. So, it's not an either or, it's that they are intrinsically linked, in my view. So just making sure you keep at that dialogue through every interaction that you have is key.
And Aidan, building on that, have you got some examples of where you've seen kind of culture really driving change? And I'm going to throw in a really great question. Somebody's asked, if you got 10 minutes with the board of a skeptical organisation to persuade them to invest in measuring their culture, what would your killer facts be? I might put that to a few other people, but Aidan, you first. You are on mute. Don't know which one of you has to unmute because I know you're in the same room.
Actually, your question there, some of the comments actually here made me think of an example just now. Sorry, I've been caught off guard. So the mindsets, and somebody in the comments mentioned about non-essential, so that the mindset towards culture change among some senior leaders, that it sometimes is considered not essential. And Marcus made a great point that if it is treated like a project, it's doomed to failure. And actually, that does make me think of an example, a recent example. We were involved, Karina and myself, in a very, very big research project recently, last year, where we interviewed many, many, many senior leaders. And the topic of this research was around the leaky pipeline. The leaky pipeline, which sees a lot of women, it's a term that is used, I'm sure we're familiar with it, sees a lot of women drop out of leadership pipelines for a variety of reasons, very few of which are to do with the women themselves as people, but it's to do with the system within which that pipeline occurs. And there was lots of group interviews and one-to-one interviews, mostly women, but some men. And one man, a senior leader in the finance industry, and was in this group interview. And we were talking about how we change practices so that fewer women drop out of our leadership pipelines and escalate to CEO and such like. And so we were talking, for example, do we change the competency framework, the leadership competency framework? There's all this tweaking. And he actually said, well, actually, it goes back to culture. So it made me think there about, let's actually look at the logics that underpin the decisions that are made. Yes, the competency framework, I'm sure, can be improved, but a lot of these decisions about who is a natural leader they're hidden, they're unsaid, they're assumed, and they're full of bias, conscious and unconscious bias. And the practical example that he gave was mentoring. For him, the Damascene moment was when he was a mentor to a woman from another organization who was in the leadership pipeline, and he heard the stories of women on the front line. And those stories made a huge impact on him. He was not able to relate to them at all, but he reflected deeply. And so you can see mentoring as a reflective practice. And he brought in his insights from this new knowledge that he was given into his own organization, into practices, into strategies, in a way that actually turned the logics of how we think what is a leader on its head. It was a really good example of a really strategic mentoring and storytelling and strategic listening approach that he brought in his organization, which did actually have transformative results in terms of the numbers of women who were then staying in leadership pipelines.
Thank you. Kath, can I put that question to you that Joe's asked about, have you had 10 minutes with the board of a skeptical organisation to persuade them to invest in measuring their culture? What would you say? What would your argument be? What's your business case?
Well, I think the leadership and boards are asking much harder questions about culture now than they used to. And we're all aware of examples in the press, Co-op over the last couple of weeks, about the risk of not knowing where your weaknesses lie. So if you have an opportunity to look at culture in a way that's not just saying, "Oh, people feel great," about well-being, about their voices being listened to, that you're taking action on that, but about have we got the qualities to be adaptable for the future? Are we enabling collaboration and connection? We know that's harder now because of the way that people are working and organisations becoming more complex and larger, more geographically spread. So have we still got the capability to really connect and collaborate with people in the way that we need to drive the business forward. And our strategy, we're all aware of the degree of change that organizations are experiencing at the moment, and that means a continual reflection on the strategy. Are we heading in the right direction? And as you do that, do you have the enabling culture to deliver on those strategic changes? So I would say to actually kind of convince the board by saying you need to know these things about whether you're aligned with strategy, whether you have any blind spots as a leader, whether what you say about this company is what people are experiencing day to day, and that you have the culture to enable your future strategy.
I guess it's looking through the lens of value erosion as well as value add, because a lot of this is connected to risk, and sometimes it's not a fun thing to talk about, but it does tend to get people's attention. Laura, Sharon, a couple of questions about kind of really making that clear link between the investment in culture and business outcomes. So how do you know that that correlation exists? And somebody else has asked, how did you decide, kind of persuade people to take that leap of faith that it's worth investing upfront? You're not a cash-rich organization. So yeah, kind of how do you kind of thread that needle to connect investment in culture to business performance and outcomes?
Oh, thanks, Katie. I often look back and think, wow, we had no money and we chose to do the whole rebranding and really establish our values and how we all wanted to work together. And it was the best thing we ever did. I don't think we had a choice, if I'm honest. We did do it on a shoestring, but we had to reset the foundations of how we were going to move forward. It very much was underpinned by being an employee-owned organisation. What I would say is it's really difficult to go, well, the changing cultures demonstrated that you've got to measure. You've got to have your performance measures. So we've got lots of KPIs around the quality of our care, the feedback from the people we support out in communities, the feedback from our carers, and it's piecing it all together. And what we have done is it's investment at every level. It's the carers feel valued. They've got the right back office support at a local level. We've got the right governance and assurance at a central level. And it's that continuous improvement journey. So I haven't got the answer, if I'm honest. But we've continued to not just measure culture as such, we've continued to measure lots of different elements and piece it all together and really gather people's opinions on what's going on as well to inform decision making. Not sure if that answers it, but
Laura, have you got anything quickly you want to add?
No, I think it's just that part of what we're doing is part of operating the business. So it's not separate either. It's just part of what we do and what we need to do to deliver good care, deliver on our contracts, and live out our values. So yes, there is obviously investment requirements, but those investment requirements, we do them because we want to see that positive impact and outcome on performance, on delivery.
Yeah. We are rapidly running out of time, so I'm just going to put one question to you, Kath, very quickly, because you mentioned subcultures, and I'm going to whip around and everybody gets a closing thought. So, Kath, somebody's asked about kind of measuring multiple cultural dimensions that can be quite fragmented. You talk about risk culture, learning culture, inclusive culture. Is there a way of bringing stuff together?
Yes, I mean, you definitely get through this because of the way that we're measuring. So we're looking at the traits of good culture, commonly accepted to be the traits of good culture that drive performance. Of course, we're looking at that. That's really, really important. And we're given a cultural profile on that. And then we're also looking at the evidence of what the organization's doing. So if, for instance, they're talking about their values, is that borne out in the sorts of policies, or all of the documents on Reddit, various different sources that you can harness. And sorry, I've just kind of lost the question.
Bringing together, I guess, the different
Subcultures. Yeah. So I mean, it obviously depends on how large the organisation is, because when you're measuring, if you've got a very small organisation, you're going to be quite cohesive anyway. If you're a very dispersed, large organisation, then obviously you can cut and dice that data according to different offices, different countries, etc. and functions within the organization, and just see if you need your marketing team to be more innovative or your sales team to be kinder. I don't know whoever heard of a kind sales team, but if you want to see certain qualities dialed up or dialed down, you can certainly see that through the data.
Brilliant. Now I'm just going to ask everybody for a very quick closing thought, like 2 words or less, 3 words or less. If you want people to take away kind of one action to strengthen their culture or to think about this culture strategic asset, what would you say, Karina? I will start with you, and I'm going to go round as you are on my screen.
Wow, 2, 3 words. I will say, so my 2 words then are role modeling. Just a sentence ago, that role modeling is a really powerful agent of change. We've been hearing today, culture's so connected with so many huge topics, speaking up, listening, they're big topics. The one thing you can immediately control is yourself and what you do. So role modeling that, being human at work, I think is a great start.
Thank you. Sharon?
Culture should be part of the day-to-day business. It shouldn't be an added extra. It shouldn't be a time-limited opportunity. It's it's that continuous improvement journey, and measuring performance, quality, culture, finances, bringing that all together and having good, strong conversations across the organisation and hearing everybody's voices, I think, is vital to really keeping the momentum.
Thank you. Aidan?
I would say 2 things. It's a never-ending journey, number 1, and it's a risk, a huge risk to do nothing.
Okay, thank you. Nikki?
I think every strong culture that I've seen in the various different organizations I've worked with over the couple of last decades is just having that really consistent, systematic approach to listening to their people. So keep the loop going, listen, prioritize, take action, communicate, and repeat. So absolutely, to Aidan's point, it's a long-term journey, but that repetitive cycle builds trust, builds credibility, and that's where people truly feel that their voice is being heard and they're part of that change. As Karina was saying, every individual employee has a part to play in these initiatives.
Yeah, Laura, and then Kath.
Values, embed it in everything you do. Communicate it as much as you can, the values, and find ways of articulating those through everything that you do, through your communications, through your training, etc.
And Kath.
So the first thing is to stop asking whether culture matters and start asking where it's helping or hindering your strategy. We saw from the I think it was either the first or the second poll that people had said it was partially helping. So it's obviously things that are hindering. Pinpoint what those things are to unlock greater performance.
Yeah.
And also the final thing, huge congratulations to Be Caring.
I think performance is the key word there, isn't it? 'Cause we haven't got time to be investing or doing anything that isn't driving performance right now. Please just stick around while I do some very quick closing pieces. I know we are very, very nearly out of time. For live webinar attendees today, we're offering a 10% discount on business culture certification assessment, and that's when you register by the 15th of March. The QR code should be on your screen now. Yes, it is. Assessment takes 2 to 4 weeks, and for the offer to apply, you must complete it before the 30th of June. Next thing to plug, the 11th Annual Business Culture Awards open for entries this week, and there is an early bird offer on now until the 3rd of April. That's 2 entries for the price of 1. Entrants usually showcase 1 or 2 significant pieces of work in their chosen categories, such as the transformation program, a new talent approach, a wellbeing initiative. So if you want to enter a piece of work, you want to celebrate with the team, then please do register your interest now. And last thing, we are running a survey currently on rethinking how organizations measure, act, and understand culture and act on it. It only takes 3 minutes to complete, and that should be also on your screen. So please do scan that QR code, and if you have time to take part, that would really help. And I'm writing a white paper, so it would really help to have lots of great views and insights on that to give me something interesting to say. We really want you to have your say on it, and we have a few £50 Amazon vouchers to be won as a bit of an incentive. And of course, you'll get a copy of the research when it comes out next month. We have to close it there because we are bang on 2:00, but I'd love to thank the entire panel for sharing their insights and experiences so candidly. I'd love to thank everybody watching for their engagement, and we will see you on the next session. Have a great rest of the day. Thank you.